So I now continue with the outline of the Apulian community cooperatives. And just to recall, as I've outlined in the prior discussion, the character of the cooperative movement is changing as the economic and social environment globally changes in the wake of globalization, ecological and climate change, and the growing threats of inequality and austerity. Community cooperatives have arisen in Italy within this changing environment. There are today around 180, or at least at last count, there could be a few more, in the whole of the country. Community cooperatives are a product of the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, and reflect, among other things, a realization of both the inadequacy of state and market-led development in terms of combating issues like depopulation and demographic decline. Especially in rural regions in Italy, these have experienced dramatic declines in population in recent decades, and the despair and misery that followed the financial collapse revealed to many the need to find new models of collective agency and local development. The first of these to arise was arguably the Valle dei Cavalieri in rural Emilia-Romagna in northern Italy. Valle dei Cavalieri originated as an attempt to revitalize a disconnected rural community. It began when residents attempted to stem the demographic decline by creating a legal form to carry out the revitalization effort. It was initiated as a social cooperative of a type B, but differed from most social cooperatives in that it basically involved a large part of the community of Succisso. The example caught on, particularly through the agency of then president of Lega Coop of 2002 to 2014, and later Italian Minister of Labor 2014 to 2018, Giuliano Poletti, who was looking to promote cooperative solutions to community revitalization. The take-up of community cooperatives was initially slow and picked up in particular with the passage in 2014 of the first regional legislation for community cooperatives in the southern region of Puglia. Moreover, while Puglia's law was the first of its kind, the community cooperative phenomenon has arguably existed since the founding of Valle dei Cavalieri in 1991. And I did have a chance some years ago to shake Giuliano Poletti's hand when on a visit, a research trip to Bologna. A very gracious man who's very much principled and committed to these notions of community development and sustainability. As to the legislative context, there is as of yet no national legislation for community cooperatives as the stakeholders were unable to reach consensus. The passage of a national social economy law in 2017, moreover, makes passage of a national law for community cooperatives unlikely at this point. So now to get to Apulia's community cooperatives, and I do take an ecosystems view of these. Legge Regionale 2014-23, that is the regional law number 23 in the year 2014, claims to build on existing legal infrastructure on cooperatives, in particular Articles 45 and 117 of the Italian Constitution, the former of which I just read in the prior video, which respectively protect the status of cooperatives, recognize their contribution to social stability, and provide the state the prerogative to make laws to protect both the natural environment and cultural goods. In keeping with these stipulations, the law aims to sustain economic development, cohesion, and social solidarity, as well as reinforce a system of integral production, as well as enhancing local resources and jobs. In keeping with these general goals, community cooperatives must enhance the capabilities of local residents, enhance traditional culture in accordance with the scope of satisfying the needs of the local community, improving the social and economic quality of life, and with respect to developing ecologically sustainable economic activity directed towards the production of goods and services, the recuperation of natural goods, and like parks, natural reserves, and monuments, the creation of jobs, as well as the generation of local social capital. Pugliese community cooperatives can be organized as producer, support, social, or mixed cooperatives with multiple member classes. Possible member classes are user, worker, as well as financing members. These member classes should always be related to roles within the local community in question. Moreover, members can be natural or juridical persons or nonprofit foundations with their seat in the locality in question. So you see again this connection with the local being emphasized. The requirements for Pugliese community cooperatives, besides their membership entailing a specific fraction of the local, there are very few requirements for Pugliese community cooperatives besides their membership entailing a specific fraction of the local population. In communities smaller than 2,500 persons, at least 10% of the populace must be a member. In communities larger than this, but smaller than 5,000, at least 7% of the populace must be a member. If the community is larger than 5,000 persons, at least 3% of the populace must be a member. In the case that membership falls below this number, the cooperative has 1 year to reach the threshold, with the alternative outcome that the cooperative is terminated and struck from the register. And by the time of my research, the register itself had actually not been established. Lastly, the government can intervene in order to firstly offer financial discounts or contribute to capital accounts or contribute to employment accounts of a community cooperative. It may also participate in a public function. Moreover, so you see this multi-stakeholder logic, which actually involves the state, involves governments, and also enables and facilitates local actors trying to activate local potentialities for development and redevelopment. Moreover, the Pugliese government recognizes in community cooperatives a privileged subject for carrying out political activity aimed at creating new jobs and for bringing neglected resources into the domain of the social scope of the public administration's prerogative. As I've discussed previously, community cooperatives arose in Italy largely in response to the continual threat of retreat of the state from regional developments, which gained impetus during the fallout of the 2008 financial crisis, which struck Italy particularly hard. The crisis marked the breakdown of a development model that has proved as inadequate as it is dangerous. In search for new modes of development and provisioning of basic needs, as well as meeting priorities like the development of human personalities and the maintenance of local cultures and traditions, community cooperatives arose after 2010, particularly in regions abandoned by both market and governments alike. The first registered community cooperative in Italy, the Cooperativa di Comunità di Melpignano, was founded in 2011 and was highly influential in drafting the Pugliese law, which was the first law of its kind in Italy. Again, the Valle di Cavalieri was more of an informal institution, a stopgap solution in rural Emilia-Romagna, which itself has much more friendly environment towards cooperatives anyway. So again, Melpignano was the first formally registered community cooperative, even if it was not the first per se. The first ever formally recognized community cooperative was started in response to an unpopular planned project by the regional government, which foresaw an international firm installing a farm of photovoltaic panels near the village, which is a medieval village, very beautiful, which I visited. Following this, a collective of 70 engaged citizens in this village of 2,500 people organized a protest to inform the citizenry and the municipality of their opposition to the project. They received assistance from the regional office of Lega Coop and drafted a plan at the time to create a service cooperative in order to self-organize the installation of photovoltaic cells. As Grazia Giovanetti, the president of the cooperative, stated, the roofs in Melpignano are mostly flat, so the panels could easily be placed on house roofs without obstructing the natural environment around the village. Thus, in 2011, a service cooperative was created with 70 members with the support of Lega Coop. In order to secure funding for the PV project, Lega Coop also provided security for a loan. Members of the cooperative paid a fee of 25 euros and installed the panels on their roofs. Electricity generation was mainly for self-use, but any excess was then sold into the grid. This plan was highly successful, and Lega Coop used the successful example of community self-organization and its leverage and resources to help draft and pass the Puglian Regional Law 2014-23, the first law of its kind regulating community cooperatives. And it thus became the first community cooperative, and the Regional Law 2014-23 became a model for other provinces and regions of Italy. As I have mentioned, numerous provinces such as Liguria, Toscana, and others have adopted similar legislations. The role of Lega Coop in both the birth of the Melpignano cooperative and the subsequent law was integral from the beginning, as Grazia suggested, helping to draft statutes and providing access to lawyers and national networks of expertise. Lega Coop was also involved by a co-op fund in financing the first project, which saw the installation of PV panels on members' roofs. After this point, subsequent projects have been primarily self-financed. For Lega Coop, the benefit, of course, was mutual, as Poletti, then president of the National Lega Coop Federation, had great ideas, but no examples to demonstrate these ideas, as Grazia Giovanetti commented. Thus, the benefit of creating the new legal form was mutual. For the cooperative, the role of being the first example also came with certain benefits, like being a template to the other examples described, which I describe in a moment, and receiving international attention from places as far away as Japan. According to Grazia Giovanetti, the absence of statutes hampered the ability of the 70 original members to self-organize their interests vis-a-vis the municipality. With the creation of the legal form of the community cooperative, these problems were either reduced or eliminated. At this point, it may be useful to ask at which point in the spectrum of the economy, society, community cooperatives see themselves or can be seen as occupying. Similar to the common resource pools that Eleanor Ostrom so famously studied, community cooperatives display some similarity to self-organized village communities, fisheries, or groundwater users, in that some element of economic provision is central, at least part of the community associates its livelihood with the cooperative. This entrepreneurial character appears the main distinction, for instance, to an association like a sports club. Giovanetti sees the distinction between the cooperative and association in the lack of entrepreneurial activity in the latter. Associations generally have no revenues, do not engage in public activity, members generally do not pay fees, and occasionally receive assistance from the state. Thus, associations are largely voluntary organizations. Community cooperatives, meanwhile, receive no assistance from the state, and members pay fees. Thus, a community cooperative is a small enterprise, while an association is strictly non-profit charitable institution. In addition to the cooperative principles, the cooperative determines all activity in accordance with two additional principles: environmental sustainability and benefits to local residents. If a community cooperative has entrepreneurial activities and is considered a small enterprise, what is the financial basis of the cooperative? As stated, the members earn some revenue by selling excess electricity into the regional grid. Moreover, in 2014, a project was begun to refurbish small abandoned buildings and turn them into so-called case dell'acqua, which literally means water houses. Here, natural filtration using roots and minerals are employed to treat groundwater, which has been partly polluted by agricultural runoff. The water is then sold at individual case dell'acqua for a small fee. Water can be purchased in both still and sparkling variants. The system is automated and customers can pay either by cash or can purchase a prepaid card. The dispenser even uses ozone to disinfect bottles placed in the filling port, encouraging citizens to reuse bottles to reduce plastic waste. The municipality co-manages the Casa dell'Acqua. It gave approval to the project as it saw the environmental benefits, first of reducing waste, as well as application in schools where water from the program is provided to students and faculty. The municipality also took over the formalities and licensing issues, as it has closer connections with the respective ministries. The total cost of the project was between 22 and 25,000 euros, and these costs were originally covered by a loan from the local bank, which was recently paid off by the project's income stream. Another early project was the restoration of the Parco del Pace, the Park of Peace, which was carried out starting in 2017. At the time, the park was quite dilapidated and had no working toilets, and much of the infrastructure was unusable. The cooperative took out a loan of 2,000 euros from a local bank and was able to refurbish the park to its contemporary status, where it is actively used by a wide range of stakeholders and citizens. The loan was repaid by income from the cafe, in which some members work occasionally voluntarily. The cooperative grew steadily in membership. Additional projects were initiated. One of the most interesting and inspiring projects is Scambio, meaning exchange. The project was financed in part by the region of Puglia by winning a public bid. The idea for the project originated in a prior effort of the cooperative to assess the needs of the community, for which it collected suggestions on a slip of paper in a box. As Grazia Giovanetti explained, the box gathered dust for some time, but was rediscovered after the region of Puglia approached with interest via the public tender. The idea of scambio, which is a mix of suggestions from various citizens of Melpignano and members of the cooperative, is to address the needs of and bring together otherwise isolated individuals, the elderly, handicapped, widows, orphans, and so on. For instance, people without automatic integration into the social fabric. The initiative was established via various smaller projects, including photography and crafts. The first projects included artisanal activities like clothes making and handicrafts like stone cutting. The products were sold to market, and this interchange and ability developed for the cooperative to help those unable to help themselves in a clear manifestation of a human-centered notion of development like that which David Ellerman suggests. Other recent examples of projects from Scambio include water deliveries to older citizens by e-bike and e-car, as well as the provision of simplified mobile phones for older citizens with apps pre-installed to quickly and easily receive certain services such as electrician, pharmacy, and others. Today, the cooperative is flourishing with over 240 members. Students are even able to perform a year of civil service in the cooperative. It has successfully adapted new projects such as after-school care for children, where children are taught the principles of environmental sustainability, such as separating waste. They also engage in arts and crafts. The birdhouses in the Parco del Pace are made by children in the program. And on the left, in fact, you can see here an event hosted by the community cooperative. The second cooperative is the Cooperative di Comunità Bicari in the small town of Bicari. Inspired by the example of Melpignano, in 2017, a group of young residents of the small village of Bicari in the north of Puglia near Foggia organized themselves together and decided to create a community cooperative. The result was the Cooperativa di Comunità Bicari. The idea of the cooperative was developed by its president, Gianfilippo Mignona, who was inspired by other examples, including Cerreto Alpi and the Cavaliera, the Valle di Cavaliere. Founding members Alessandro and Antonella suggested that it was easy to start the cooperative based on the prior experiences they were able to study and learn from, such as Melpignano, and through the help of the municipality and Lega Coop. The municipality was pivotal in providing space for the cooperative to meet and engage in its activities at no cost. Moreover, it offered a number of concessions to the fledgling cooperative, including exclusive rights to manage a local lake in exchange for upkeep and maintenance. As part of the deal, the cooperative manages a cafe whose building is owned by the municipality. The cooperative is able to keep any revenues from its management of the cafe. The cooperative currently manages a project in conjunction with the local attraction, the Parca Aventura, where it has built so-called bed and trees, as opposed to bed and breakfast, hotel-like accommodations designed as tree houses. It has also built and manages the website visitbicari.com and has helped establish an exchange for Italian immigrants to Argentina who are suffering as a result of that country's chronic economic hardships to relocate their lives to Bicari. They have helped the city manage a successful €1 house campaign, which has sold or is in the process of selling more than a dozen units to both Italian citizens and foreigners interested in living in Bicari for at least part of the year, thus stemming the demographic decline in Bicari and many other rural communities face. The cooperative's largest source of income is the so-called bubble room, an inflatable bubble that couples and individuals can rent for the night, which has proven quite popular. Members of the cooperative also work, in fact, they're usually booked out 1 year in advance. Members of the cooperative also work as tour guides and operate the cafe near the lake the cooperative manages. They have also linked up local bed and breakfast providers to an online platform where they are able to connect to a larger potential client base. In fact, I connected them as well to Fairbnb, so now you should be able to stay in Bicari bed and breakfast via Fairbnb. Another project the cooperative is involved in is the Piccola Scuola di Civiltà Contadina, which was initiated in part by Lega Coop and is financed partly by the region of Puglia. In this small school of civic agriculture, citizens learn aspects of their local tradition, such as traditional methods of agriculture, have lessons in the local dialect, and other aspects of slow food and cultural exchange. E Labora Galatone is a bit of a different story, is from the two preceding examples. Firstly, Galatone to the southwest of Lecce near Gallipoli is much larger than either of the communities mentioned above, with over 14,000 residents. Secondly, in this case, the founding of the cooperative was not entirely attributable to local citizen self-organizing. Instead, the mayoral elections of 2017, the local candidate for the Parti Democratica, the PD, ran on a platform of enhancing the local community by embracing the then recent phenomenon of community cooperatives. While the mayor is not a member of the cooperative, he has traditionally supported the cooperative's efforts. And it is still very much in a self-finding phase. They offer children's after-school care, a number of other services, and are locating other activities to which they can contribute, such as rejuvenating abandoned land and allowing farmers or unemployed people to learn agricultural trades, and to increase the use of local legacy crops, such as a specific peach that actually originates from the area. Fourthly, Legami Brindisi is a young community cooperative in a problematic part of Brindisi. The cooperative was founded in 2020, so it's very new, by a group of activists led by Paola Meo, who were dissatisfied with the conditions in the neighborhood. The cooperative is located in the Parco Busquicchio, a multifunction recreational complex in the extreme southeast of Brindisi. The neighborhood, Santelia, is a troubled, low-income, working-class neighborhood whose citizens mostly work elsewhere and reside in the area to sleep. The complex was in a dilapidated state, with many of the amenities, which include sports facilities, in disrepair. Nobody wanted to come here, stated Maria Teresa Condaldo, a founding member of the cooperative. Because of the level of crime, the space largely remained unused. The facilities, which include a playground for children, tennis courts, and a covered gymnastics area, a soccer and rugby field, has been actively used in the 1990s, as Paola, the cooperative's president, remembered. In fact, Paola was convinced of the need to recapture the spirit of the area when it was still a nice place to be. The troubled situation was worsened by the pandemic, during which vandalism increased, and the gymnastics area had even been sabotaged by the local mafia and used to store unstamped cigarettes. Moreover, lights were destroyed, so no sport activity could occur at night. Founding the cooperative involved actually many problems, since the members had many problems acquiring the rights to regenerate the space. A local church located inside the facility was hostile to the idea of children returning, perhaps due to the experience with crime. A council was established to raise awareness of the project in the neighborhood and promote the idea of restoring the park to its former state, and even to regenerate it beyond that level. The council consisted not only of individuals, but also several local organizations, including 2 churches and some sports associations. During their initial stage, it was realized that there could be some economic benefit to forming a cooperative. In the case of Legame, it was the founder Michaeli Pinatelli who learned of the idea of community cooperatives during a conference in Rome on community organizing, and who brought the idea back to Santelia. Lega Coop advised the council members initially and advised starting a community cooperative. The law on community cooperatives, which had existed since 2014, also helped to ease the startup process. While the cooperative was only 1 year old, during the interviews that I conducted with the Parco Busquicchio, preparatory work to the cooperative goes back several years. The municipality, which is in some ways a reluctant partner, had to be included in the deliberations. The council members soon realized that the cooperative form did not have a romantic purpose, but rather served as a vehicle to bring the different stakeholders together to achieve their political aims. That is, pressuring the municipality to realize the rights of citizens to use public spaces. Founding members therefore suggested that the actual establishing of the cooperative was relatively easy, yet the struggle with the institutions, including the municipal government, were more challenging. One of the reasons for the challenge derived from the intersections which Legame Brindisi occupies. combining the maintenance and preservation of public spaces with private economic activity. This required overcoming of significant bureaucratic hurdles, but as I've stated, the Pugliese legislation on community cooperatives helped contribute a foundation by providing a legal form by which to organize the stakeholders. The document establishing the cooperative was signed by a notary publicly in the park during the public festival in which vendors came to sell wares, and was organized to draw attention to the cooperative within the neighborhood. The cooperative has contributed to the restoration of public infrastructure in an economically depressed and otherwise marginalized community. In fact, the cooperative has encouraged a resurgence of other business activities in this primarily residential district, comprised mostly of commuters who live in Sandelia, mainly to sleep. By its successes, the cooperative has achieved a reach that extends beyond Sandelia, which has drawn local and even international interest, helping to locate new donors and an increased sense of self-efficacy on the part of stakeholders. Moreover, the co-op has demonstrated to the municipality that it is possible to recreate new spaces. One interesting aspect of the current status of Legame is the fact that the pizzeria that abuts the cooperative is not a part of the organization and is furthermore not convinced of the values of cooperation. Thus, a conflict exists with respect to the public use of chairs and tables around the pizzeria, which are within the park and thus subject to municipal jurisdiction. A pending legal process may ultimately resolve the conflict, but at present, the general public is de facto allowed to use the chairs and tables, a decision the pizzeria owner has reticently accepted. MEST is a new community cooperative in Madonella, a quarter in the Pugliese capital Bari, with about 20,000 inhabitants. The quarter being one of artists and artisans, the cooperative's aims revolve around the needs and aspirations of this class of individuals. The cooperative, which as of the research trip in 2021, is less than 1 year old, having been founded in 2020, was developed as a result of winning a prize by the province of Puglia. It seeks to offer a range of services, including for local residents living nearby, providing a space to receive packages, offering a library to members, and this inculcates long-term relationships between members and the broader community. And the idea is that the cooperative can help people in the neighborhood to lead better lives by doing things like farmers markets and even spreading local artists' art within barbershops and restaurants, and many other projects. COSE is similar to MEST, which is short for Cooperative di Comunità di Serranova, is atypical in that it is the only community cooperative in Italy totally located in a rural, that is non-incorporated community. The center of Serranova is home only to around 60 people, with another 1,000 to 2,000 residing near or around the center in winter and summer respectively. That is, there are many seasonal residents, vacationers. The history of Serranova is quite young, another distinguishing feature. The village exists on land that prior to the Second World War was owned by a local noble. After the war, the government nationalized large tracts of private holdings, including the land where Serranova arose. Infrastructure was planned and built, including a cinema, supermarket, schools, and recreational facilities, and the government built 200 small houses for families. Thus, families moved to Serranova from all over Puglia around 70 years ago, an era one could call the community's golden years. However, in recent decades, a depopulation has taken place, partly caused by increasing levels of poverty. This means that the village is shrinking as more and more people move away. Most recently, there has been a renewed interest in the region, with growing tourism contributing the most to this change. However, this revival has come with its own challenges, as most new inhabitants are not permanent residents, but usually only reside in Serranova during the summer. This means that many of the residents are not concerned with local issues. This situation has led to a set of very heterogeneous inhabitants, including farmers, retirees, and pensioners, as well as poverty-stricken residents receiving social assistance. All of this means that Serranova is a place in transition, as one member said, necessitating the search for a new identity. Such a search requires some level of social experiment, according to Roberto La Penna, architect and founding member of COSE. The cooperative currently has 50 members, most of whom live elsewhere for at least part of the year. It currently lacks an administrative structure. The members are, as of this writing, November 2021, all user members, although there are efforts to initiate activities facilitating worker members. There are currently 7 members on the board, most of whom have full-time jobs, some in tourism, some in agriculture. The first project with which the cooperative hopes to launch involves a search for sustainable mobility. The idea is to offer 200 e-bikes in the summer and to have a form of public transit in the winter. Another initial project of the cooperative involves restoring a fountain without which Serranova has no public water source offering potable water. Another area of interest of the cooperative is education, with the school closure that I discuss in the cooperative economy being the initial impetus for founding the cooperative. During the pandemic, the cooperative has run a flea market, which was seen as an opportunity for connecting both new and old residents of Serranova. While in the initial stages, the cooperative was financed mainly through the member contributions. Most of the cooperative's revenues today come from the Terra Huacheto project, a public venture to maintain the wetlands near the village on the Adriatic coast. The project is publicly funded and managed by the cooperative. The cooperative, it's a nature reserve. The cooperative plans to create a market for members' products. As Serranova is an agricultural village, this project would allow local agricultural producers to connect to each other and to local residents. The cooperative switched recently to a member finance system, which has led to a lull in activity. Potential projects range from converting abandoned houses into tourist residences to helping locals deal with a changing landscape. This open-endedness is why the abbreviation COSE was chosen. COSE means things in Italian, and we want to do lots of things, according to Rosita Venella, founding member. Moreover, asked whether the fact that many citizens don't live in Serranova full-time presents a unique challenge to COSE, the two reply that the advantage of having members live most of the year in other cities is that they bring very different experiences and points of view from the residents. At times, they can also be conflicting, but we believe that this is an advantage together with the fact that these members also bring other people and almost become Serranova's ambassadors. The criticality of this situation becomes evident in winter. It seems one witnesses a community in hibernation, the two write, waiting for spring, but fortunately this waiting period lasts less than 3 months and we are ready to start again with old and new projects. Roberto suggests that a startup fund would facilitate the creation of more community cooperatives, as even in the initial phase, 5,000 to 6,000 euros have to be made each year, and that this may not be sustainable for less prosperous communities. Despite these challenges, both Rosita and Roberto would recommend the community cooperative form to others, especially to small communities, as it can be very effective for organizing a diversity of projects and for bringing together different stakeholders. So this was a very rapid overview of some. There are other cooperatives that I did visit, like Albero Bello, so again, and the case studies in the cooperative economy towards the stakeholder democracy are very much more in depth and extensive. So if you're interested in these projects, and I do recommend reading again this part of chapter 11. I think it's 11.3. And again, we've seen in these various cooperatives clear evidence of a mission-oriented cooperative economy or ecology, focusing on a synthesis of ecology, understanding, and economy management. In particular, each case showed the centrality of a multi-stakeholder logic, bringing in citizens, both young and old, municipalities, local associations, and often featuring the cooperative federation as a mediator in constructing a legal form in the form of a cooperative to mediate different interests. Moreover, examples such as Elabora show a desire to engage first in the process of understanding the ecosystem before moving on to managing it. In keeping with the notion of an ascendant macroculture, social learning and self-efficacy presented above or in the preceding discussion, we also saw that in the case of the Pugliese Cooperative di Comunità, the community cooperatives, these were inspired frequently by the initial case of Nel Pignano, with this community bearing the innovation costs together with its partners in Lega Coop and the local municipality, with other communities and stakeholders learning about the example in a diversity of ways, seeking to apply its lessons to their own personal struggles to self-organize. A recurring lesson was also the struggle and necessity of changing mindsets and mental models in order for the model of community cooperatives to function in local contexts. This makes it all the more interesting that one of the most successful examples of an ecosystem of community cooperatives can be found in the rural, neglected by central government region of Puglia, with its low incidence of trust in formal institutions and frequent incidences of mafia control, such as in Serranova. Thus, the examples go to show how important social pioneers can be in creating examples for others to emulate, that breaking down problems into manageable units and connecting with networks of stakeholders like Lega Co-op can serve to build bridges of mutual benefit, building on existing connections and expertise, which can be applied to new local contexts and thereby raising both awareness of the new phenomenon while simultaneously building up local stakeholders' sense of self-efficacy, which is far from a self-evident fact, as the above case studies demonstrate. After Puglia, a number of other regions introduced community cooperative laws. These tend to fall into about 4 camps. Puglia, discussed above, represents one camp of community cooperative legislation. Such environments are characterized by the attempt to clearly define the role and purpose of community cooperatives. This characteristic can be seen in the desire to distinguish Puglia's community cooperatives from associations. To this distinction, Marco Protano of MEST stated that the main difference is that community cooperatives provide a job, whereas an association is merely concerned with volunteer work and also supported by the state. Rosita Vinella of COSE similarly stated that community cooperatives include all people working together, while association is too abstract and far away from people. Also, work in a community cooperative has a connected and general character, not a parochial one. Roberto La Pena, also of COSE, suggested that community cooperatives involve the general interest. Associations have projects impractical to carry out and also have to consider municipal legislation. This differentiation is a particular feature of the Southern Italian community cooperative. In addition to Puglia, Abruzzo and Basilicata also have detailed laws distinguishing the function of composition of community cooperatives. Most recently, such law was passed in January 2022 in Trentino, Alto Adige, Südtirol. These laws all differ amongst themselves. For instance, while the most recent law from Trentino, Alto Adige specifies a specific minimum number of members, 9, the Pugliese law records a percentage of the local population ranging from 3 to 10% of the local populace. A second type of community cooperative is represented by the law passed in Tuscany in 2019 that specifies the location, composition, and purpose of any community cooperative without necessarily distinguishing it strongly from other types of cooperatives in form. Also in Piedmont, a similar law to Tuscany's was passed recently in 2021. The third type of community cooperative legislation representing regions like Liguria and Sardinia leave the specification of the composition very open, specifying only their function in terms of revitalization of neglected regions. A fourth type incorporates community cooperatives directly into social cooperative legislation. Emilia-Romagna is an example of this, as is Lombardy. These two provinces formulate legislation on community cooperatives, in fact, therefore, without introducing particular distinctions between social cooperatives and community cooperatives, as Sforzi and Borzaga have commented, with the most recent region being Trentino Alto Adige in January 2022. Well more than a dozen Italian regions, and I think there are only 16, so it's the vast majority, have approved specific regulations in this regard, albeit in different ways and with the risk of fragmenting the reference framework and to create a multiplicity of types of community businesses. Thus, the result is such that on the one hand, none of the regulations propose specificities that should characterize community businesses, and on the other, on the contrary, some of these impose constraints that risk limiting their operations. Thus, there is still some need of a Goldilocks iterative process of finding suitable, effective, yet not delimiting constraints. My sense is that the stakeholder dialogue of the next years will bring increasing clarity in this regard. To conclude, Italy has a very strong and developed legal architecture for recognizing cooperatives and specifying their combined social and economic logics, and in particular, a legal architecture from which many other polities can learn and benefit. The recent experience of community cooperatives demonstrates these benefits. with strong national cooperative legislation providing a context in which a legal and social innovation can flourish and develop organically. From the Valle de Cavalieri's adoption of the community cooperative idea within the guise of a social cooperative in 1991, to Trento Alto Adigé's adoption of a law on community cooperatives in January 2022, we see a non-linear development where experiments and dialectical processes of trial and error enable local practitioners and regional lawmakers together with advocacy groups like Coop to develop policies and structures that meet critical local needs, namely addressing demographic decline and the decimation of rural communities in the face of deindustrialization and market-driven globalization. It would appear that the next step is arguably to draw up general lessons from the experiences of the various regions which have spearheaded the move, as well as those that have come more recently with the purpose of promulgating a national law on community cooperatives. Because Italy does not rely on a common law system, which we see actually in the next case study of the UK, specifying legal forms does enable actors more recognition by public authorities and by the general public. A compelling future research agenda would involve bringing together stakeholders in order to hear arguments pro and contra various legal regimes governing rural renewal, emphasizing the potential contribution community cooperatives can provide. In a second stage, one would aim to find common ground amongst the initial positions. Based on that assessment, an outline of a basic national legislation could be drafted. In keeping with the ecological perspective we are promoting in this research agenda, it should be recalled that the ecosystem view has two faces, both growth and development. While the initial growth stage of community cooperatives surely should proceed by any means possible, the durability and resilience of the networks they entail will over time increasingly rely on established mechanisms and processes. This means the need for developing standards grows over time. If the community cooperatives of Italy do not wish to limit their growth and avoid becoming a marginal phenomenon, then a more clear national set of rules and regulations is advisable at some point. So in the next video, again, as I just teased, I will be talking about the situation of business to cooperative conversions in the UK. I hope to see you there.